Midnight whispers echo through fog-shrouded gardens, where a hidden pact seals fates in blood. A shadowy figure slips away, leaving clues that only one keen mind can unravel. Welcome to the gripping tale of Miss Marple and the secret pact of the Midnight Gardeners. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and dive into this mystery. If you enjoy the story, subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us. Where are you watching from in the comments below? Chapter 1. The Village Awakens to Whispers. In the quaint English village of St. Mary Mead, life moved at a gentle pace, much like the slow bloom of roses in summer gardens. Miss Jane Marple, an elderly spinster with a sharp eye for human nature, sat in her cozy cottage, knitting a soft woolen scarf while gazing out at the misty morning. She had lived here all her life, observing the comings and goings of neighbors with quiet curiosity. The village was known for its lush gardens, where residents took great pride in their floral displays, competing in annual shows that brought everyone together in friendly rivalry. But lately, an undercurrent of unease rippled through the community. Whispers spread about strange midnight meetings in the old communal garden behind the church. No one knew exactly what was happening, but rumors hinted at a secret group calling themselves the Midnight Gardeners. Miss Marple first heard about it from her young maid Lily, who chattered endlessly while dusting the shelves. Lily mentioned how her beau, Tom, had seen flickering lights and hooded figures gathering under the ancient oak tree after dark. At first, Miss Marple dismissed it as youthful imagination, but then odd events began to unfold. Mr. Hargreaves, the local grocer, found his prized dahlias uprooted one morning with a cryptic note left behind reading, "Pact unbroken." Mrs. Ellis, the postmistress, reported missing letters that seemed tampered with, and even the vicar noticed unusual footprints in the churchyard soil. These incidents puzzled the villagers, but no one connected them until Miss Marple started piecing things together in her mind. She recalled similar patterns from her past experiences where seemingly innocent hobbies masked deeper intrigues. Gardening, she thought, was a perfect cover for secrets, as it involved digging deep into the earth, much like uncovering hidden motives. One afternoon, while sipping tea in her garden, Miss Marple spotted Colonel Bantry, her old friend, strolling by. She invited him in for a chat, hoping to glean more details. The colonel, a retired military man with a booming voice, settled into a chair and shared his concerns. He had overheard two gardeners arguing about a pact that bound them to silence and something about protecting the village's legacy. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her knitting needles clicking steadily. She suggested it might be harmless, like a club for sharing seeds, but the colonel shook his head, mentioning how his wife, Dolly, had found a strange amulet in their compost heap engraved with midnight symbols. This piqued Miss Marple's interest further. She decided to investigate subtly, starting with a visit to the garden club meeting that evening. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the hedgerows, Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and walked to the village hall. The room buzzed with chatter as gardeners displayed their blooms and swapped tips on pest control. She mingled casually, chatting with Mrs. Price, the club president, who boasted about her rare orchids. Miss Marple asked innocently if anyone gardened at night for special moonlit views. Mrs. Price laughed, but her eyes darted nervously, suggesting perhaps some did for special rituals. Pressing gently, Miss Marple learned of a subgroup that met secretly to preserve ancient gardening lore passed down through generations. It sounded romantic, but Miss Marple sensed tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. Later that night, as the clock struck 12, Miss Marple peered from her window overlooking the communal garden. Sure enough, dim lights flickered, and figures emerged from the darkness. They formed a circle, whispering oaths and exchanging small packets that could be seeds or something more sinister. One figure stood taller, seeming to lead the ritual. Miss Marple strained to see faces, but the hoods concealed them well. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the night, and the group scattered, leaving behind a crumpled form on the ground. Heart-pounding, Miss Marple grabbed her shawl and hurried out, but by the time she arrived, the garden was empty, save for a single glove dropped in haste. Picking it up, she noted the embroidered initials J.M., which could belong to several villagers. Back in her cottage, she pondered the implications. Was this a simple accident, or the start of something deadly? The pact, whatever it was, held the key, and Miss Marple vowed to unravel it before more harm came. As dawn broke, she sipped her morning tea, planning her next steps, knowing that in St. Mary Mead, secrets never stayed buried for long. This chapter sets the scene, introducing the mysterious pact and Miss Marple's initial observations. Stay tuned for Chapter 2, where the first clue leads to unexpected revelations.
Chapter 2. The Glove and the Hidden Trail. Miss Marple sat at her small oak table, the embroidered glove resting before her like a silent challenge. The initials J.M. glinted in the morning light, teasing her with possibilities. She knew at least 3 villagers with those initials: John Mason, the blacksmith, Jenny Meadows, the schoolteacher, and Julian Marsh, the reclusive botanist who rarely left his greenhouse. Each could be involved, but jumping to conclusions was not her way. She needed evidence, and the glove was her first solid lead. Tucking it into her handbag, she decided to start with a visit to the blacksmith, known for his fiery temper and strong hands that could easily wield a gardening spade. The village was stirring now, with children scampering to school and shopkeepers opening their doors. Miss Marple walked briskly past the bakery, where the scent of fresh scones lingered, and headed toward the forge. John Mason was hammering a horseshoe, sparks flying as he worked. She greeted him warmly, asking about his garden plot to ease into the conversation. John wiped sweat from his brow and boasted about his marigolds, but his tone shifted when she mentioned the communal garden. He claimed he never went there at night, too busy with work. Casually, she asked if he'd lost a glove recently. His eyes narrowed, and he muttered something about misplacing one last week, but quickly changed the subject. Miss Marple thanked him and left, sensing his unease, but no clear guilt. Next, she visited Jenny Meadows, who was correcting papers in the schoolhouse. Jenny, a cheerful woman with a love for roses, welcomed Miss Marple warmly. When asked about the glove, Jenny laughed, saying she owned no such fancy item, as her gardening gloves were plain cotton. She admitted to hearing rumors of midnight meetings, but dismissed them as village gossip. Her openness seemed genuine, yet Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in her voice when the communal garden came up. The final stop was Julian Marsh, whose cottage sat on the village outskirts, surrounded by towering sunflowers. Julian was eccentric, often seen muttering to his plants as if they could reply. He invited her into his cluttered greenhouse, where exotic ferns and strange vines thrived. When shown the glove, he studied it closely, then shook his head, claiming it wasn't his. But Miss Marple caught a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Pressing gently, she asked about his nighttime habits. Julian admitted to occasional moonlight walks to check his rare night-blooming cereus, but denied joining any groups. As she left, a scrap of paper fell from his workbench. Pretending to adjust her scarf, Miss Marple picked it up unnoticed. Back home, she examined the paper, finding a sketch of the communal garden's oak tree with times scribbled beside it. Midnight every 3rd night. This matched the night she'd seen the gathering. Her pulse quickened. Julian was hiding something, but was he the leader or a reluctant participant? To confirm the schedule, she decided to observe the garden again that very night, the next marked time. After supper, she settled by her window with a cup of chamomile tea, her binoculars ready. As the village clock chimed 12, shadows converged under the oak. The tall figure was there again, directing the others in hushed tones. They dug briefly near the tree's roots, then dispersed. This time, one figure longer adjusting a small marker in the soil. When all was quiet, she crept out, flashlight in hand, and found the marker, a flat stone etched with a crescent moon. Beneath it lay a tightly wrapped bundle. Heart racing, she unwrapped it, revealing a vial of dark liquid and a folded note. The note read, "Keep the oath, or the legacy ends." The vial's contents were unclear, but its presence suggested something far graver than gardening tips. Slipping both into her pocket, she hurried home, locking the door behind her. As she sat by the fire, her mind raced. The Pact was no mere club. It guarded a secret worth killing for. The vial and note were her next clues, but confronting anyone now would be reckless. Tomorrow she would seek out Colonel Bantry again, hoping his connections could shed light on the mysterious liquid. For now, she placed the items in a locked drawer, feeling the weight of the mystery deepen. The village slept, unaware of the danger blooming in its heart, but Miss Marple was wide awake, ready to dig deeper. This chapter uncovers new leads and heightens the suspense. Stay tuned for Chapter 3, where the vial's contents spark a dangerous discovery.
Chapter 3. The Vial's Secret and a Dangerous Step. Miss Marple woke early, her mind buzzing with the weight of the vial and note now hidden in her drawer. The cryptic words, "Keep the oath or the legacy ends," echoed like a warning, and the dark liquid inside the vial hinted at something far beyond village mischief. She needed answers, and Colonel Bantry, with his old military contacts, was her best hope. After a quick breakfast of toast and marmalade, she slipped the vial and note into her handbag, wrapped in a handkerchief for safety, and set off for Dollycott Manor. The morning air was crisp, with frost dusting the hedgerows, and the village hummed with its usual rhythm, milk bottles clinking, a dog barking in the distance. At the manor, Dolly Bantry greeted her with a warm smile, ushering her into the drawing-room, where the colonel was reading the newspaper. Miss Marple wasted no time explaining the midnight gathering and showing them the note. She hesitated, then revealed the vial, its contents glinting ominously in the light. The colonel's face tightened, and he suggested it might be a chemical, perhaps tied to the garden's soil or plants. He knew a retired chemist, Dr. Hargrove, who lived in the next village and could analyze it discreetly. Dolly, ever curious, urged them to act quickly, sensing the village's peace was at stake. Miss Marple agreed, and the colonel promised to arrange a meeting that afternoon. As she left, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a shadow flitting behind a yew hedge. Back home, she busied herself with knitting to calm her nerves, but her thoughts kept drifting to the Pact's purpose. Was the legacy a treasure, a tradition, or something darker? The clock ticked toward noon when a sharp knock startled her. It was Lily, her maid, wide-eyed and breathless. She'd overheard two men at the pub talking about a delivery gone wrong, mentioning a vial and someone called the Keeper. Lily didn't know more, but it was enough to make Miss Marple's heart skip. The Keeper could be the tall figure leading the midnight gardeners. She thanked Lily, urging her to stay quiet, and prepared for the visit to Dr. Hargrove. The colonel arrived promptly, driving his old Bentley, and they set off for the neighboring village. Dr. Hargrove, a wiry man with thick spectacles, welcomed them into his cluttered study, shelves lined with bottles and books. Miss Marple handed him the vial, explaining only that it was found under unusual circumstances. He examined it, sniffing cautiously, then set up a small burner to test a drop. Minutes later, his face paled. The liquid, he said, was a rare botanical poison derived from a plant not native to England, deadly in small doses. It could kill silently, leaving no trace in a routine autopsy. Miss Marple's mind raced. Poison meant intent, perhaps murder. She asked if it could be linked to gardening, and Dr. Hargrove nodded, mentioning certain exotic plants could produce such toxins, often cultivated in secret for their potency. The colonel pressed for names, but Dr. Hargrove needed more time to pinpoint the exact source. They thanked him and left, the vial now back in Miss Marple's handbag, its danger confirmed. On the drive back, the colonel speculated about blackmail or sabotage, but Miss Marple remained quiet, piecing together the clues. The poison, the note, the keeper, it all pointed to a pact protecting something worth killing for. As they neared St. Mary Mead, a sudden jolt shook the car. A tire had burst, forcing them to pull over near a wooded lane. While the colonel inspected the damage, Miss Marple noticed fresh footprints in the mud leading into the trees. Her instinct screamed ambush, but before she could warn him, a rustle came from the bushes. She grabbed the colonel's arm, pulling him back, just as a heavy branch crashed where he had stood. Someone was watching, someone who knew they were getting close. Heart pounding, they fixed the tire and drove off, but Miss Marple's resolve hardened. The midnight gardeners were desperate, and that meant she was on the right trail. Back in her cottage, she locked the vial away, knowing it was both evidence and a target. Tomorrow she would revisit Julian Marsh, whose sketch had led her to the stone. He was her best link to the keeper's identity. As night fell, she sat by her fire, the village silent but alive with secrets. The poison was real, and so was the threat. This chapter tightens the mystery with a deadly revelation and a narrow escape. Stay tuned for Chapter 4, where a confrontation yields a shocking truth.
Chapter 4. The Botanist's Confession. Miss Marple rose with the dawn, her mind fixed on Julian Marsh. His sketch of the oak tree and his nervous reaction to the glove made him a key piece in the puzzle of the midnight gardeners. The vial of poison, now locked in her drawer, weighed heavily on her thoughts, its deadly purpose a chilling reminder of the stakes. She needed to confront Julian, but carefully. His knowledge could unmask the keeper or make him a target. After a light breakfast of porridge, she slipped the sketch into her handbag and set out for his cottage, the village stirring quietly under a pale November sky. The sunflowers around Julian's home stood tall, their heads drooping slightly, as if guarding secrets of their own. She knocked, and Julian answered, his eyes wary but softened by her familiar presence. Inviting her into his greenhouse, he busied himself with a potted fern, avoiding her gaze. Miss Marple began gently, complimenting his rare plants before steering the conversation to the communal garden. She mentioned the midnight meetings, watching his hands tremble as he pruned a leaf. Then, with measured calm, she produced the sketch, placing it on his workbench. Julian froze, his face draining of color. He stammered, claiming it was just a doodle. But Miss Marple pressed on, her voice kind yet firm, saying she knew about the stone and the vial. At this, Julian slumped onto a stool, his resolve crumbling. He confessed he was part of the midnight gardeners, drawn in by their promise to preserve an ancient botanical legacy, a collection of rare, dangerous plants hidden in the communal garden for centuries. The Pact, he explained, bound members to protect these plants at all costs, as they held medicinal secrets that could heal or harm. The keeper, their leader, enforced the oath with fear, and Julian had joined out of curiosity, but stayed out of dread.
He swore he didn't know the keeper's identity, as they always wore a hooded cloak, but he'd overheard them mention a ledger, a record of the plants and their uses, buried somewhere in the garden. The vial of poison, he admitted, was likely extracted from one of their specimens, although he hadn't known it was missing until now. Miss Marple listened intently, her knitting needles idle in her lap, as Julian revealed the group's next meeting was set for tomorrow night, under the full moon. He begged her not to expose him, fearing the keeper's wrath. She reassured him, promising discretion, but urged him to stay away from the meeting for his safety. As she left, a chill ran through her. Julian's confession confirmed the Pact's danger, but the ledger could be the key to unraveling it all. On her walk home, she passed the churchyard, where the vicar was tending graves. On impulse, she asked if he'd noticed anything odd near the oak tree, hinting at buried items. The vicar, puzzled, mentioned old rumors of a hidden vault beneath the garden, tied to the village's founding families, but dismissed it as folklore. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. A vault could hold the ledger, or worse, more poison. Back in her cottage, she jotted down notes, mapping out the garden's layout from memory. The oak tree was central, its roots sprawling, a likely spot for something buried deep. But digging alone was risky, and confronting the keeper without proof was foolish. She decided to enlist Colonel Bantry's help again, trusting his steady nerve. That evening, she phoned Dollycott Manor, arranging to meet the colonel tomorrow to plan their next move. As she hung up, a sharp tap at her window made her jump. Peering out, she saw nothing but darkness, though a faint scratch on the sill suggested someone had been there. Her heart thudded, but she refused to be cowed. Locking her doors, she sat by the fire, the sketch and Julian's words fueling her determination. The ledger was out there, and with it, the truth about the keeper. Tomorrow night's meeting could be her chance to catch them off guard, but she'd need to tread carefully. The midnight gardeners were watching, and their secrets were worth killing for.
Chapter 5. Moonlight and a Risky Plan. Miss Marple spent the morning poring over her notes, the sketch of the oak tree now marked with her guesses about where the ledger might be buried. Julian's confession had given her a clearer picture of the midnight gardener's motives, but the keeper's identity and the ledger's contents remained elusive. The full moon tonight would bring the group back to the communal garden, and she couldn't miss this chance to observe or act. Alone, she risked being caught, so she needed Colonel Bantry's strength and discretion. After a quick lunch of soup and bread, she walked to Dollycott Manor, the village quiet under a gray sky that promised rain. The colonel was in his study, polishing an old regimental badge, and listened intently as Miss Marple shared Julian's revelations about the Pact, the poison, and the ledger. His jaw tightened at the mention of a hidden vault, and he agreed the ledger could expose the keeper and their plans. Together they devised a plan. They'd hide near the garden before the meeting, watch the group's movements, and, if possible, locate the ledger's hiding spot. The colonel suggested bringing a small shovel, but Miss Marple cautioned against digging tonight. Stealth was their ally. They'd only act if the keeper revealed something critical. As dusk fell, they prepared, dressing in dark coats to blend into the shadows. Miss Marple tucked a notebook and pencil into her pocket, ready to jot down any clues. They reached the communal garden just as the moon rose, casting silver light over the flower beds. Slipping behind a dense yew hedge, they crouched low, the oak tree looming ahead. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and late-blooming roses. Soon the clock tower chimed midnight, and figures emerged from the darkness, hooded and silent. The tall figure, the keeper, stood at the center, gesturing sharply as the others formed a circle. Miss Marple strained to hear, catching fragments of whispered words. Ledger, safe, oath unbroken, outsider threat. Her heart sank. Were they talking about her? The keeper handed out small pouches, likely more vials or seeds, and pointed to the oak's roots, where one member knelt and adjusted the crescent moon stone. Miss Marple nudged the colonel, nodding toward the spot. That had to be the ledger's hiding place. Suddenly, the keeper's head turned, as if sensing eyes on them. Miss Marple held her breath, gripping the colonel's arm. The group paused, then resumed, but the keeper's gaze lingered on the shadows. After a brief chant, they scattered, leaving the garden empty. Miss Marple and the colonel waited, muscles aching, until silence settled. Creeping forward, they examined the stone. It was heavier than expected, but the colonel pried it up, revealing a shallow hollow. Inside was a small tin box, rusted but intact. Miss Marple's pulse raced as she lifted it, but before she could open it, a twig snapped nearby. They froze. A low voice hissed from the darkness, too muffled to identify, warning them to leave the box and go. The colonel stood, ready to confront the stranger, but Miss Marple whispered for him to stop. Fighting could ruin everything. Reluctantly, they replaced the box and retreated, the voice fading behind them. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple brewed tea, her hands steady despite the scare. The box was real, and the ledger was likely inside, but someone was guarding it fiercely. The voice hadn't sounded like Julian, ruling him out as the keeper. She suspected the tall figure knew they'd been watched, which meant the next meeting might be more dangerous. The colonel suggested involving the police, but Miss Marple shook her head. Without the ledger, they had no proof, and the Pact's influence might reach further than they knew. Instead, she proposed a bolder move. Return tomorrow night, when the group wouldn't expect them, and retrieve the box before the keeper could move it. The colonel agreed, though his eyes betrayed worry. As he left, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the moon's glow filtering through her curtains. The ledger was within reach, but so was the danger. Tomorrow she'll need all her wits to outsmart the midnight gardeners. This chapter builds tension with a close call and a daring plan. Stay tuned for Chapter 6, where the box reveals its secrets and a betrayal.
Chapter 7. The Coded Truth and a Deadly Showdown. Miss Marple sat at her kitchen table, the ledger open under the soft glow of a single lamp. The rain outside drummed steadily, masking the village's nighttime hush, but her focus was razor-sharp. The ledger's pages, filled with cryptic entries, names, and the crescent moon symbol, were a map to the midnight gardener's secrets. She'd sent Jenny Meadows home hours ago, shaken but sworn to silence, and the colonel had left to scout the garden at dawn for signs of the shooter. Now, alone, Miss Marple traced the inked lines, determined to decode the keeper's identity before the Pact could reclaim the ledger or silence her for good. The entries listed plants like nightshade and hemlock, paired with dates and initials, some tied to unexplained deaths in the village's past. One name, John Mason, appeared repeatedly, linked to deliveries of rare seeds. Another entry mentioned Mrs. Price, the garden club president, overseeing a cleansing in 1923. But the crescent moon symbol, marking the keeper's orders, was maddeningly anonymous. Miss Marple sipped cold tea, her mind sifting through patterns. The ledger wasn't just a record, it was a blackmail tool, binding members through fear of exposure. The keeper wielded it like a blade, and last night's gunshot proved they'd kill to protect it. By mid-morning, her eyes ached, but a breakthrough came. A faint watermark on a page, barely visible, showed a crest tied to the village's founding family, the Harrows. The vicar's tale of a hidden vault flashed back. Could the Harrows be the Pact's origin? She jotted down the clue, then cross-checked the ledger's dates with village records she kept in a dusty almanac. One entry, from a decade ago, mentioned a vault sealed under the keeper's watch with J.M. delivering the key. John Mason, the blacksmith, was her next target,
but confronting him directly risked tipping off the keeper. Instead, she decided to visit the churchyard where the vault might lie, hoping to find physical evidence. She tucked the ledger into a hidden compartment in her sewing box, locked her cottage, and set out, umbrella shielding her from the drizzle. The churchyard was deserted, its gravestones slick with rain. She lingered near the oak tree, now just beyond the garden's boundary, and studied the ground for signs of a vault. A flat, moss-covered slab near the tree caught her eye, its edges too precise for a natural stone. Kneeling, she brushed away dirt, revealing faint etchings of a crescent moon. Her pulse quickened. This had to be the vault's entrance. Before she could investigate further, heavy steps crunched behind her. She turned to see John Mason, his blacksmith's apron streaked with soot, his face a mix of anger and fear. He demanded to know why she was meddling, his voice low but threatening. Miss Marple stood calmly, her umbrella a frail shield, and asked about the ledger's key. John's eyes widened, then narrowed. He admitted crafting a lock for the vault years ago, under orders from someone he wouldn't name, but swore he'd left the Pact after realizing their poisons were used for murder. His fear seemed genuine, but Miss Marple pressed, asking if he knew the keeper. He hesitated, then whispered that the keeper was someone high in the village, hiding in plain sight. Before he could say more, a shadow moved behind a gravestone, a figure, cloaked, raising a pistol.
Chapter 8. The Vault's Secrets and the Pact's Final Roots. The rain had stopped, leaving St. Mary Mead draped in a damp, uneasy calm as Miss Marple sat by her parlor fire, the ledger open once more. The confrontation in the churchyard lingered like a bitter aftertaste. Mrs. Price, unmasked as the keeper, was now in police custody. Her venomous threats silenced, but her secrets still potent. The crescent moon slab, John Mason's escape, and the ledger's cryptic entries pointed to a hidden vault that held the Midnight Gardener's deepest truths. Miss Marple knew the Pact's influence stretched beyond one woman. Its roots tangled in the village's history, perhaps even its founding families. The ledger hinted at wealth, power, and poison. But the vault could reveal the full scope of their crimes, and who else remained loyal to the oath. She sipped lukewarm tea, her eyes tracing the ledger's final pages, where a coded map sketched the churchyard, with the oak tree and slab marked in precise ink. The word harrow appeared again, tied to a 19th-century entry about a sacred trust. The vicar's folklore about a vault tied to the Harrow family felt less like myth now. She needed to open that slab. But doing so alone, with John Mason still at large and other gardeners possibly watching, was reckless. Colonel Bantry, her steadfast ally, was her best hope. But she also considered the vicar, whose knowledge of the churchyard might prove vital. As dawn broke, casting pale light through her curtains, Miss Marple resolved to act today, before the Pact could regroup. She locked the ledger back in her sewing box, dressed in her warmest tweed coat, and set out for Dollycott Manor, the village waking slowly under a sky heavy with clouds. At the manor, Colonel Bantry was polishing his boots, his face etched with fatigue from the previous night's chaos. Over a pot of strong coffee, Miss Marple shared her findings, the slab's markings, the Harrow connection, and the ledger's map. The colonel's eyes narrowed at the mention of a vault, recalling old army tales of hidden caches used to smuggle contraband. He agreed it could hold evidence, documents, poisons, or even the rare plants themselves that would dismantle the Pact for good. He suggested involving the police, but Miss Marple hesitated. Mrs. Price's high standing meant the Pact might have allies in authority, and John Mason's escape suggested insiders were still active. They needed proof first, something undeniable to force official action. The colonel proposed a small team, himself, Miss Marple, and the vicar, whose cooperation could be secured with tact. She nodded, appreciating his pragmatism, and they drove to the vicarage where the vicar was tending his herb garden. Miss Marple approached gently, mentioning the churchyard slab and its crescent moon etching as a historical curiosity. The vicar, intrigued, admitted the Harrow family had funded the church centuries ago, with rumors of a crypt beneath the grounds for their private use. He'd never seen it, but recalled an old key stored in the vestry, engraved with a moon symbol. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. This could unlock the vault. The vicar, sensing her urgency, agreed to help, though his hands trembled as he fetched the key, a heavy iron piece worn smooth by time. With the key secured, the trio headed to the churchyard, the colonel carrying a crowbar and shovel concealed in a sack. The churchyard was deserted, the oak tree's branches swaying in a chill breeze. The slab, half hidden by moss, looked undisturbed, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught fresh scratches on its edge. Someone had been here since last night. The colonel knelt, testing the key in a barely visible slot beneath the crescent moon etching. It turned with a grinding click, and the slab shifted, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. The vicar gasped, crossing himself, while Miss Marple felt a mix of dread and determination. The colonel lit a flashlight, its beam cutting through the musty air, and led the way, Miss Marple following, the vicar hesitating, but urged on by her calm resolve. The stairs ended in a small chamber, its walls lined with shelves holding sealed jars, dried herbs, and leather-bound journals. A wooden chest sat in the center, carved with the Harrow crest. Miss Marple's heart raced. This was the vault. The colonel pried open the chest, revealing stacks of letters, gold coins, and vials of dark liquid identical to the one she'd found. The journals detailed the Pact's history. The Harrows had cultivated rare plants for profit, using their poisons to eliminate rivals, with the Midnight Gardeners as their enforcers. Names of past and present members filled the pages. Mrs. Price, John Mason, even Jenny Meadows' late father, confirming the Pact's generational grip. But one entry, dated last month, chilled her. A plan to cleanse the village of outsiders, signed with the crescent moon symbol and a new initial, T. Before she could process this, a shadow flickered at the staircase's mouth. John Mason emerged, his face twisted with desperation, a knife glinting in his hand. He'd followed them, waiting for his chance to reclaim the vault's secrets. The vicar shrank back, but the colonel stepped forward, crowbar raised. Miss Marple, clutching a journal, spoke firmly, accusing John of loyalty to the Pact despite his claims of leaving. John laughed, admitting he'd stayed to protect his family's share of the wealth, but swore he wasn't T, the new keeper. He lunged for the chest, but the colonel swung, knocking the knife away. John stumbled, hitting his head on the wall, and slumped unconscious. Miss Marple checked his pulse. He was alive, but out cold. The vicar, trembling, suggested calling the police, and this time Miss Marple agreed. They carried John up, locked the vault, and phoned the authorities from the vicarage. As police swarmed the churchyard, securing the vault's contents, Miss Marple studied the journal's final entry. T could be anyone, Tom, Lily's boo, or even a stranger, but the cleansing plan meant danger lingered. Back at her cottage, she hid the journal, knowing the police would analyze the vault's evidence. The Pact was crumbling, but T's shadow loomed, a final threat to St. Mary Mead's peace. She'd need to watch the village closely, her sharp eyes ready for the next clue. This chapter unveils the vault's chilling truths and a new danger, setting the stage for Chapter 9, where the hunt for tea takes a perilous turn.
Chapter 9. The Hunt for Tea and a Perilous Turn. Miss Marple sat in her parlor, the fire crackling softly as she turned the pages of the journal she'd taken from the vault. The police had seized the rest of the vault's contents, vials, coins, and records, but she'd kept this one, its final entry haunting her, a plan to cleanse the village, signed with a crescent moon symbol and the initial T. Mrs. Price was in custody, John Mason under guard at the hospital, and the Midnight Gardeners network was unraveling. Yet T, the new keeper, remained a shadow, their identity a dangerous unknown. The village felt deceptively calm, its cobblestone lanes and tidy gardens hiding the Pact's lingering poison. Miss Marple knew T was close, watching, perhaps even among her neighbors, and the cleansing plan suggested a strike was imminent. She needed to find T before they acted, but the journal offered only clues, not answers. The initial T pointed to several villagers, Tom, Lily's beau who worked at the bakery, or perhaps Tessa, the quiet librarian who tended her garden with obsessive care. Even the vicar, Timothy, wasn't above suspicion, given his access to the churchyard. Miss Marple sipped her tea, now cold, and resolved to start with Tom, whose name had surfaced in Lily's pub gossip about a delivery gone wrong. But she'd need to move carefully. T was desperate, and desperation bred violence. After breakfast, she walked to the bakery, the morning air sharp with the scent of frost and fresh bread. Tom was kneading dough, his apron dusted with flour, and greeted her with a shy smile. Miss Marple bought a loaf, easing into conversation about the village's recent troubles. She mentioned the garden club, watching his reaction. Tom's hands paused, and he admitted hearing rumors of midnight meetings, but claimed he was too busy to garden. When she asked about deliveries, his smile faltered, and he mumbled about helping a friend move crates one night, nothing more. His unease was clear, but Miss Marple sensed fear, not guilt. She thanked him and left, her suspicions shifting to Tessa, whose library overlooked the communal garden, a perfect vantage point for a keeper. At the library, Tessa was shelving books, her movements precise but nervous. Miss Marple inquired about old village records, subtly mentioning the Harrow family. Tessa's eyes flicked to a locked cabinet, and she offered to check later, her voice tight. Pressing gently, Miss Marple asked if she gardened at night. Tessa laughed, too quickly, saying she preferred daylight for her roses. The deflection was smooth, but Miss Marple noted her trembling fingers. As she left, she spotted a gardening book on Tessa's desk, bookmarked with a pressed leaf, a night-blooming cereus, the same plant Julian Marsh had mentioned. The coincidence tightened her resolve. Tessa was hiding something, perhaps tied to the Pact's botanical secrets. Back home, Miss Marple cross-referenced the journal entries with her notes. A line about the watcher's perch caught her eye, possibly referring to the library's high window. She decided to observe Tessa that evening, hoping to catch her near the garden. Colonel Bantry, still shaken from the vault's discovery, agreed to join her, bringing binoculars for a discreet stakeout. As dusk fell, they positioned themselves in an alley across from the library, the communal garden's oak tree just visible. The village clock struck 9, and the library's lights dimmed, but Tessa didn't leave. Instead, a figure slipped out the back, moving toward the garden. Miss Marple's heart raced. It was Tessa, carrying a small spade. She and the colonel followed, at a distance, keeping to the shadows. Tessa knelt near the oak, digging swiftly, then pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Before Miss Marple could signal the colonel, a second figure emerged, Tom, his face pale but determined, holding a lantern. He whispered urgently to Tessa, who shook her head, clutching the bundle. Their argument grew heated, and Miss Marple caught the word cleanse. Suddenly, Tessa raised the spade, striking Tom's shoulder. He staggered, dropping the lantern, which flared and died. The colonel rushed forward, shouting, and Tessa froze, the bundle falling to the ground. Miss Marple stepped into the moonlight, her voice calm but firm, demanding answers. Tessa's defiance crumbled, and she sobbed, admitting she was T, chosen by Mrs. Price to lead after her arrest. The bundle held a new batch of poison meant for outsiders who threatened the Pact's legacy.
Tom, she revealed, had been her reluctant ally, coerced into delivering vials, but now trying to stop her. The colonel helped Tom to his feet, his shoulder bleeding but not fatal. Miss Marple unwrapped the bundle, finding 3 vials and a list of targets, her own name among them. Tessa lunged for the vials, but the colonel restrained her, his grip unyielding. Miss Marple pocketed the list, knowing it was evidence to end the pact. As they marched Tessa to the police station, Tom limped behind, promising to testify. The station was abuzz, officers already piecing together the vault's secrets. Miss Marple handed over the vials and list, her heart heavy but resolute. Tessa's arrest would shake the village, but the cleansing was stopped. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, the journal still locked away. The pact was broken, but its scars would linger. She'd watch the village closely, ready for any lingering shadows. This chapter traps T in a tense confrontation, clearing the way for Chapter 10, where St. Mary Mead faces the Pact's final reckoning.
Chapter 10. The Pact's Reckoning and St. Mary Mead's Dawn. Miss Marple sat in her cozy parlor, the fire casting warm shadows as she closed the journal from the vault, its secrets now fully unraveled. The arrest of Tessa, the new keeper known as T, had shattered the midnight gardener's hold on St. Mary Mead, but the village was still reeling from the Pact's long shadow. The police, armed with the vault's contents, Tessa's vials, and the list of targets, had spent the past day rounding up the remaining members named in the ledger. Miss Marple, though weary, felt a quiet resolve. She had pieced together the final threads of the mystery, and tonight, as the village gathered for an emergency meeting in the town hall, she would reveal the full truth to ensure the pact could never rise again. The journal, her notes, and the testimonies of Tom and Jenny Meadows lay before her, a map of betrayal, greed, and hidden power that had gripped St. Mary Mead for centuries. She sipped her tea, now tepid, and prepared to face the village, knowing her words would heal as much as they wounded. The clock chimed 7, and she donned her tweed coat, tucking the journal into her handbag. The air outside was crisp, the village lanterns glowing softly as neighbors trudged toward the hall, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. Miss Marple walked with Colonel Bantry, who had stood by her through every danger, his presence a steady comfort. The hall buzzed with murmurs, the vicar at the podium, ready to moderate, while police officers stood guard at the doors. As Miss Marple took the stage, the room fell silent, eyes fixed on the elderly spinster whose sharp mind had undone a centuries-old conspiracy. She began with the communal garden, its beauty a mask for the midnight gardener's sinister pact. She explained how the Harrow family, founders of St. Mary Mead, had cultivated rare, poisonous plants in the 1700s, selling their extracts to wealthy buyers for profit and power. The pact, formed to protect this trade, bound members through oaths and blackmail, using the ledger to record debts, murders, and secrets. The vault, hidden beneath the churchyard slab, held their wealth, gold, poisons, and journals detailing every crime. Mrs. Price, the former keeper, had led with an iron grip, using the poison to silence threats, her status as Garden Club president a perfect cover. Miss Marple revealed Tessa's role as T, chosen to continue the pact after Mrs. Price's arrest. Her plan to cleanse the village, targeting anyone who questioned the pact's legacy, including Miss Marple herself. She held up the journal, its pages listing members past and present, John Mason, who crafted locks and delivered poisons, Jenny Meadows' father, who died protecting the vault, and even minor figures like the postmistress, Mrs. Ellis, who tampered with letters to protect the pact's communications. The audience gasped, some weeping, others staring in disbelief at neighbors they'd trusted. Miss Marple softened her tone, addressing the village's pain. She revealed Tom's coerced role, delivering vials under threat, and his bravery in confronting Tessa,
earning nods of forgiveness from the crowd. Jenny Meadows, she explained, had joined to protect her family's name, but turned against the pact, her testimony helping the police. The vicar, though not a member, had unknowingly aided the pact by guarding the churchyard key, a mistake he now vowed to atone for. The ledger's final secret, Miss Marple disclosed, was the pact's funding of village institutions, the church, the school, even the garden club, tainting St. Mary Mead's heart with blood money. The cleansing plan, she clarified, aimed to eliminate outsiders like herself, whose curiosity threatened exposure, but also targeted villagers who wavered, like Tom. She paused, letting the weight settle, then urged the village to reclaim its soul. The police, she confirmed, had seized the vault's contents, destroyed the poisons, and arrested 12 members named in the ledger, with John Mason now in custody after being caught fleeing the village. The Harrow family's wealth, she suggested, could be repurposed to restore the community, perhaps funding a new library or garden free of secrets. A murmur of hope rose, but Miss Marple raised her hand, her voice firm. The pact's roots were in human greed and fear, traits that lingered in every heart. She called for vigilance, urging neighbors to speak openly, to question, and to trust again. As she stepped down, the vicar led a prayer, and Colonel Bantry squeezed her arm, whispering pride in her courage. The meeting ended with plans to form a council to oversee the village's healing, and Miss Marple slipped out, the night air cool against her face. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, the journal now a relic of a broken pact. The village would mend, but scars remained. Trust would take time, and she'd watch closely, her knitting needles ready, her mind ever sharp. St. Mary Mead was free, its gardens blooming for beauty alone. But Miss Marple knew secrets never died easily. She smiled faintly, ready for whatever came next. This chapter lays bare every secret, bringing the mystery to a close. If you've enjoyed this tale, grab a cup of tea, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more stories from St. Mary Mead.